Fasting is often pitched as the ultimate modern biological hack. But long before we had apps to track our eating windows, abstaining from food was one of humanity's oldest behavioral practices. The ancient Greeks didn't know about cellular pathways, but they observed the results. Plato famously abstained from food specifically to achieve greater physical and mental efficiency. To him, targeted deprivation cleared the mind. Over centuries, this search for clarity evolved into monastic asceticism. Figures like Saint Catherine of Siena pursued severe starvation, not for health, but as a path to spiritual purity and direct communion with the divine. Entire religions institutionalized this discipline. In Judaism, the fast of Yom Kippur requires an absolute surrender of physical comfort to focus the mind entirely on the Day of Atonement and repentance. And today, millions of Muslims observe Ramadan, fasting from sunrise to sunset for a full month to achieve soul purity and a collective spiritual reset. Looking at this history, you have to wonder, did these ancient seekers of purity stumble onto a biological mechanism that we are only now starting to map in the lab? But fasting also has a darker, much more visceral history. As we move into the modern era, the extreme biological toll of starvation was repurposed as a tool of political protest. Mahatma Gandhi subjected himself to prolonged fasting over a dozen times. He used the visible decay of his own body to force the world to look at social injustice, gaining massive political leverage. Decades later, Irish activists like Bobby Sands took this to the absolute limit. They weaponized the collapse of their own physiology, turning starvation into the ultimate form of social disruption. These strikes ratcheted up environmental and social tension, creating life-or-death standoffs that paralyzed governments and captivated the public. History shows us that abstaining from food carries profound emotional and physical weight. Yet today, we have stripped away the politics and the spirituality, repackaging this extreme deprivation as a mainstream casual tool for weight loss. Which brings us to the clinical reality of modern intermittent fasting. Does this practice trigger unique physiological fat-burning mechanisms, or is it simply a clever behavioral trick to get us to eat less? To answer that, we have to compare intermittent fasting to the reigning champion of dietary interventions, continuous caloric restriction. This is the clinical gold standard, which requires cutting about 25% of your daily calories every single day. The clinical data on caloric restriction is rock solid. If you maintain that deficit, you will lose weight, your blood pressure will drop, and your cardiovascular risk will decline. The problem is the mental toll. Calculating portions and tracking calories at every meal creates immense decision fatigue. This explains why dropout rates for traditional diets skyrocket after just a few months. People simply burn out. Enter intermittent fasting. It was designed specifically to bypass that mental friction. Instead of worrying about how much you eat, you only worry about when you eat. Look what happens when clinical trials put these diets head-to-head. The left bar tracks intermittent fasting. The right tracks caloric restriction. Both lock in at identical weight loss. Intermittent fasting doesn't bypass thermodynamics. Results match because total energy deficits match.
Intermittent fasting is a psychological workaround. You are trading the chronic mental burden of counting calories for the acute physical burden of fasting. That physical burden is most obvious in alternate day fasting, or ADF. This is an extreme protocol where you eat normally one day and then slash your intake to just 500 calories the next. Mapping insulin resistance data, alternate day fasting pulls ahead. The ADF line drops significantly lower and faster than continuous restriction. But this edge is highly targeted, specifically benefiting patients diagnosed with metabolic syndrome or type 2 diabetes. Achieving those numbers requires a severe trade-off. Fasting days induce an intense, persistent hunger that rarely subsides, creating a high level of physical stress. For the average person looking to drop a few pounds, that level of chronic deprivation is exhausting. Most people simply cannot sustain it and eventually abandon the protocol. Alternate day fasting acts like a powerful clinical scalpel for metabolic repair. But a scalpel is too sharp and, frankly, too painful to be used as an everyday lifestyle tool. For a daily lifestyle tool, most people turn to time-restricted feeding, commonly known as TRF. This is the highly popular 16-hour fast paired with an 8-hour eating window. The main benefit of TRF is passive. By compressing your meals into 8 hours, you naturally cut out late-night snacking. This generally creates an uncounted deficit of roughly 500 calories a day, resulting in a modest weight loss of around 3%. But data reveals a nuance. Your timing matters. Splitting results between standard afternoon TRF and early morning TRF shows clear clinical superiority. Syncing meals with daylight yields better insulin sensitivity, lower oxidative stress, and stronger circadian alignment. Yet, eating all your meals between 8 a.m. and 2 p.m. carries a massive social cost. It completely isolates you from standard cultural norms, forcing you to skip family dinners and evening social events. Standard afternoon TRF sacrifices that maximum optimized metabolic repair, but in exchange, you get vastly superior long-term adherence because you can actually eat dinner with your friends. Beyond weight loss, there's a rising trend of people using fasting for cognitive enhancement and longevity. The proposed mechanism, fasting depletes glucose, forcing the liver to produce ketones. These travel to the brain, theoretically triggering BDNF to protect neurons. But clinical reality is inconsistent. Human trials show moderate improvements for some, but fail to prove fasting is a universal cognitive enhancer. Intermittent fasting shows fascinating neurological potential in animal models, but right now, it is not a proven biohack for the human brain, and it is certainly no replacement for actual psychiatric care. Your success depends on which psychological friction you tolerate. Map your options. Need flexibility but don't mind tracking macros? Choose caloric restriction. Need an aggressive medical insulin reset? Choose alternate day fasting. Hate counting calories and want a simple rule? Choose time-restricted feeding. And if you do choose TRF, you can optimize for the early schedule, provided you are willing to trade evening dinners for better circadian health. The best diet is never the one that looks biologically perfect on a spreadsheet. It's the one you can actually sustain for the next year.
Thanks for watching. Make sure to like this video and share it with your friends. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button.